When I think about Nuremberg, images of gingerbread, carved wooden Christmas ornaments, the Reich Party rally grounds, the destruction at the end of World War II, grainy black and white photos from the Nuremberg trials, and much more pop into my head. Nuremberg is all of those things, but it's a lot more. Built on either side of the Pegnitz River and looking up at the Imperial Castle, a surprising amount of medieval structure survives to this day, although much of it had to be heavily rebuilt. This is a huge center for art, industry, politics, and trade. Let's start taking a look today on The Armchair Traveler. If you think this content is interesting or useful, please like, share, and subscribe. This will help the channel grow. Travel content often involves a lot of history, and history can be really word-heavy, heavy enough that the details often don't make it into a video blog. If you care to dig deeper, you can visit my regular blog on WordPress, where you'll find deep dives, travel tips, reviews, warnings, and the nuts and bolts on how to travel safely and conveniently. If you'd like to keep up with my posts, you can follow me on Twitter. The addresses are on your screen and in the description box below. Today, Nuremberg is the second city of modern Bavaria, a title that probably rankles local history buffs, because once this was not just an independent city, but the capital of a huge duchy or dukedom called Franconia. The city sits where the Pegnitz River emerges from the Franconian hills. You can see that pretty clearly in the image above on the left. In medieval days, this wasn't just a free city, it was one of the capitals of the Holy Roman Empire. The Imperial castle here dates back to at least 1000 AD. By 1105, the Holy Roman emperors rebuilt and enlarged it. The castle was the residence of the Kaisers of the Holy Roman Empire for about 500 years. This gives the castle and the town that grew up around it a verifiable heritage that can be traced all the way back to Charlemagne. For sightseers like us, however, the city divides neatly along the river line into two distinct sections, which together form the Old Town and are enclosed to this day by city walls that you can walk if you choose. We're going to start in the southern section, named after the glorious St. Lawrence Church, and called Lorenzer Aldtstadt, which just means St. Lawrence Old Town, entering the city as have generations of tourists and more from the southeast gate in the city wall. Nuremberg's sturdy protective walls are still there. They were pierced by 7 gates with 7 guard towers, giving access not just to the interior of the city, but excellent views and protection from the outside. One of these was called the Ladies' Gate. It got its name from the Klara cloister, the Poor Clare convent, which sits to this day several blocks inside the walls. You can see the Ladies' Tower with its associated drawbridges here. The lifting cables are just visible in this image in the little central tower. They connected one drawbridge, which led from the outside to the central tower, and a second drawbridge, which led from the central tower to the gate. This painting shows what it looked like from outside the city walls in about 1750, but the walls, tower, and gate are much older than that, and much of it still exists. This picture gives you an idea of just how sturdy those walls are. This is the Ladies' Gate as you see it today. Just inside is our next stop, the Handwerkerhof, or the handyman's shops. The Craftsman's courtyard is located handily just outside the main train station. This is a tourist shopping destination done up in the style of a medieval village. It has several local family-run businesses which sell handcrafted items like glass, wood, leather, pottery, cuckoo clocks, and jewelry. It also houses some traditional German restaurants and a beer garden. The photos I've seen and every serious review of the place warn me to brace myself for a kitsch overload. This might really be a miniature Disneyland in Nuremberg. Kitsch in this case means quaint or quirky. It isn't offensive. The area was formerly a customs house where money was extracted from people coming in and out of the city for the benefit of the city government. Today, it fulfills the same function, only this time it's extracting money out of tourists. Often I'll avoid places like this, but today I think we might want to take a short break, look around, and sample some beer. Taken fairly, surroundings and souvenirs, no matter how sanitized and commercialized, will give us some idea of how the city developed. This is King Street, or Königstrasse, a pedestrianized street leading all the way northward from the Frauentor, the Ladies' Gate, to the Museum Bridge in the Pegnitz River. It'll take you, with a couple of side trips, to most of the important sites in the southern half of the city. The street got its name during something called the Bavarianization of Nuremberg, and was named after the first Bavarian king, Max I Joseph. Ironically, in my opinion, this was not Max's preferred entryway into the city. His first stop was always at Lorenzkirche, the St. Lawrence Church, which we'll visit later on. It's on this street, but this route would have him approach it from the side. I've read that Max preferred to approach it from the west side to view the magnificent portals, which we'll see soon enough. You'll recall that the Lady Gate, where we entered the city, was named after the St. Clare Convent. This little church is probably the oldest in Nuremberg, and yet it doesn't even host a parish. It's what's called an open church, which means it's open to all faiths. It began in 1270, in Romanesque style, although it has been heavily remodeled and looks vaguely Gothic, with those slightly pointed windows and what I take to be buttresses on the sides of the apse, shown in the photo above. The oddest feature here is probably the carved statue of Job, shown above, stripped bare by German artist Gerhard Marcks. Marcks, like Job, lived a long life and didn't die until 1981. He was a German sculptor, printmaker, and designer who helped revive the art of sculpture in Germany during the early 20th century. Marcks had teaching positions at the Bauhaus and the Halle School of Arts and Crafts in the 1920s and 1930s. In 1933, however, the Nazis dismissed Marcks from his teaching post after he tried to protect a Jewish student from persecution and protested when his Jewish colleagues were fired first. Anyone who spoke up in those days, politically or even through his art, against the Nazi regime was seen as a threat and dealt with. Marcks was labeled a degenerate by the Nazis, who confiscated and destroyed several of his works. Despite this, Marcks managed to survive the war and continued to work afterward. This version of the casting was set up in 1982. This monumental outdoor sculpture, called the Street of Human Rights, opened up in 1993. It sits on the street between the old and new buildings of the German National Museum, which we'll visit in a little bit. This sculpture is part of Nuremberg's effort to shake off its Nazi-era reputation as the city of party rallies and reinvent itself as a city of peace and human rights. The German National Museum has been around since 1952 and houses a huge collection of items relating to German culture, not just here in what we think of as modern Germany, but every place where the German language was spoken, and art extending from prehistoric times through to the present day. This is exactly the kind of museum I could get lost in, and it isn't a place an efficient visitor, or one with limited time, can wander around and expect to see even the most significant holdings. I have a tendency to wander, so when I visit, I fully expect to spend at least a half a day here, and from what I've read, it deserves far more. Fortunately, there's an audio tour that will walk me past the highlights, or what I always think of as the museum's greatest hits. In my WordPress blog, I wrote about audio tours, and I'll put a link in the description box for you if you're interested in reading more. Nuremberg was long a center for the visual arts, and the collection here includes works by famous artists from several eras in Nuremberg's history. Painter and graphic artist Albrecht Durer, sculptors Veit, Stoss, and Adam Kraft, as well as outstanding works by German and German-speaking artists of different eras and different locations. Lucas Cranach the Elder was a German Renaissance painter and printmaker using woodcuts and engraving. He was court painter to the elixirs of Saxony for most of his career, a great and, more importantly, paying gig, and is known mostly for his portraits, both of German princes and those of the leaders of the Protestant Reformation, whose cause he embraced with enthusiasm. He was a close friend of Martin Luther. Cranach's painting here portrays the theme of the wiles of women, assuming always that the woman was lying. There was a medieval assumption here, and the tests used to prove or disprove the assertions were more than hair-raising. They were deadly. The woman was charged with infidelity. She confesses only to having laid in the arms of her husband and the fool behind her. No one took the assertion about the fool seriously. He was barely considered as a human. They just laughed. However, to test her truthfulness about the rest of the claim, she was forced to stick her hand in the jaws of the lion. She emerged with her hand intact. Because she was speaking the truth, the lion didn't bite off her hand. There's a little more to this moralistic story, however. The fool is, in fact, her disguised lover, but he wasn't taken seriously by any of the witnesses. The joke was on the rest of them. This photo shows Albrecht Durer's idea of what Charlemagne and Sigismund, each a Holy Roman Emperor, must have looked like in life. The half-length pictures are actually larger than life. No likenesses are known of Charlemagne, who ruled from 800 to 814, but the stories tell us that he was tall. Durer used artistic license to invent this image, presenting him frontally in an imposing posture. His interpretation of Charlemagne's appearance set the standard for the emperor's portraits that existed well into the 19th century. Durer was born about 50 years after Sigismund, who ruled until he died in 1437. So Durer never saw the man in the flesh, although likely he could see other portraits done from life. The point of the images, always displayed as a pair, is to establish the relationship to two men who were not related biologically. Sigismund was probably what we'd call Polish, although there are some chronicles that suggest he was born in Nuremberg. He wasn't a blood relative to Charlemagne, but that wasn't the point. Each was a Holy Roman Emperor, and the images cemented the relationships in people's minds. To call Veit Stoss a mere woodcarver seriously undervalues his skills and influence. This chandelier is in the shape of a dragon. He crafted the chandelier according to his design by his contemporary, Albrecht Durer. The fusing of art and nature is noteworthy, with the antlers appearing to be an organic part of the mythical beast. The chandelier originally hung in the city council chamber in Nuremberg town hall. Stoss was one of the most important and influential of a clutch of important and influential artists who were either born here, moved here, or left here. You can read a lot more about him in my WordPress blog. I'll put a link in the description for you. This interesting building was so severely damaged during World War II that what we see today appears to be mostly a complete recreation rather than a repair job. It's called the Mauthalle, which means toll house. The building has been a customs house and a granary, one of 12 inside the city walls designed to provision the medieval city. It was built on the site of a former city moat. The attic is identifiable to anyone who grew up on a farm under that huge pitched roof as a ventilated storage area. Do you see those openings on the 5-level roofline? Those are windows. They're there to provide for ventilation of the grain stored inside. Wet grain cannot be stored safely. It'll develop molds and fungus that will at best spoil it and can sicken both humans and animals. The most famous of these diseases is probably ergot poisoning, which most scholars think might have been the cause of the so-called witch sightings and burnings in 18th century Massachusetts. Interestingly enough, there is a rather large brewery, bar, and restaurant in the basement of this building. St. Lorenz, or St. Lawrence, is a medieval church here in Nuremberg, dedicated to St. Lawrence. Lawrence was one of the 7 deacons of the city of Rome under Pope Sixtus II, who was martyred in the persecution of Christians by the Roman Emperor Valerian in 258. Lawrence was a real person. The traditional account of his martyrdom asserts that he was tied to something that looked like a barbecue grill, and then he managed to quip somehow that he was done on one side and that his torturers should turn him over. That rather glib story disguises, in my opinion, the hideousness of how he was probably killed. On the right, you see a depiction of the so-called Massacre of the Innocents. In the book of Matthew, we're told that the 3 wise men went to Jerusalem at first to find out from the king where this so-called king of the Jews had been born. Herod told them to go to Bethlehem and to come back and report to him. The Magi were warned in a dream that Herod wanted to find a child and eliminate him because Herod considered himself to be the king of the Jews. The Magi did not accomplish their mission. When Herod saw that they hadn't done that, he sent out an order to kill all of the boys in Bethlehem and the neighborhood who were 2 years old and under. When we blew through the German National Museum, I showed you a tiny sample of Veit Stoss's art. As you can see on the left, he was a woodcarver of incredible talent. This hangs above the main altar here in St. Lawrence Church. Another of the most famous artists in the city was a man named Adam Kraft. Kraft was a carver and something of a rogue, I think. He was responsible for carving a huge tower that stands inside the church, designed to receive the leftover bread from Holy Communion. Here you can see him carved into the shape of a table leg. I wrote up deep dive blogs on each of these two pieces. You can read about them and the artist in my WordPress blog. Just search for Stoss or Kraft. I'll also put links in the description box below. After all that walking, wrapping up with a madly carving Adam Kraft, like any good handyman, he would need a hearty lunch and some beverages, as do we. Here in Nuremberg, the possibilities are literally endless, and a local beer and tiny sausages called Nurnbergers seem like a good bet. Munich may be the beer capital of Bavaria, but Nuremberg, which in history was part of a different duchy called Franconia, has its own distinct variety of beer called rotbier or red beer. It's copper-colored. In Nuremberg, the original Nuremberg red beer has been brewed according to local brewing regulations since the Middle Ages. The beverage apparently fell out of favor for a while after World War II, but now there are several breweries in or near the city who have revived the craft. On the right, you can see Nurnbergers. These tiny sausages, like the beer, also are regulated, and you can't call something a Nuremberger unless it's made according to the regulations and in the city. They look to be about as long as a finger and generally are served in a bread roll with 3 or on a plate of 6 with something like potato salad, kraut, and bread, as you see here. Thank you for joining me for a walk through the southern section of Nuremberg and for the lunch. Next time, come back and we'll shift our attention northward to the Pegnitz River bridges, the Frauenkirche, the Hauptmarke, and the rest of the San Sibold quarter, as well as the Imperial Castle here on the Armchair Traveler.